Welcome to the Debka File, a weekly roundup of exclusive news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East, broadcast to you live from the heart of the region. Coming up on the program today, Putin will show off Russian strength to Netanyahu during his visit to Moscow. Blazing and explosive kites enter Israel from Gaza. Israel prepares for Iranian strikes on the northern border. Israel's seizure of Iran's nuclear activity and its impact on Trump. And now to our top headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin has invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Moscow for the Victory March on Wednesday.
אפגש עם נשיא רוסיה ולדימיר פוטין במוסקבה והשתתף במצעד הניצחון על גרמניה הנאצית. הפגישות שלי עם נשיא רוסיה הן תמיד חשובות לביטחון ישראל ולתאום בין צה"ל והצבא הרוסי. ישראל שומרת על חופש פעולה מלא כדי להגן על עצמה.
This victory march is the 73rd anniversary of Russia's defeat of Nazi Germany. The annual parade showcases Russian weapon systems and military strength. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has stated that if the Russian weaponry in Syria is used against Israel, the IDF will strike back. Putin is hoping that Russia's advanced weaponry will impress Netanyahu to the point that the Israeli Prime Minister will advise Lieberman to reconsider Israel's tactics. In the meeting between Putin and Netanyahu, which takes place just 3 days before Trump's May 12th deadline for the Iran nuclear deal, the two leaders will discuss the future of the nuclear deal and the situation in Syria. Putin will convey several messages to Netanyahu. First, Moscow believes that a military clash between Israel and Iran is inevitable. Putin will warn Israel to stay away from Russian forces in Syria, or it will come back to haunt them. Netanyahu is urging Trump to withdraw from the nuclear deal, but Putin claims that if this happens, no one in the Middle East will be the liaison between Israel and Iran. Putin believes this communication is vital during aggression between the two countries in Syria. Putin has asked Netanyahu to promise that if a war erupts with Iran, Israeli forces will not harm Russian soldiers or weapon systems. Hamas has been using kites as a tool for terror. On Saturday, Knesset member Chaim Yellen posted on his Twitter account, quote, "My friend this morning found a kite with a camera attached less than a kilometer from the Gaza border. Don't make light of the kites. Don't underestimate the enemy." 4 or 5 kites are being sent over a day, and some are armed with powerful explosive charges. On Friday, military officials warned residents living in this area that they must not touch any of these dangerous weapons. There are several types of kites: flaming kites, which have set fire to many acres of farmland, kites holding gas canisters, kites with cameras, and kites with explosives. The IDF's attempts to intercept the kites with drones has failed, and when they collided, both exploded. The military has said they will find a solution in the next 2 weeks to deal with this new form of terror. On Sunday night, Israel's 3-week-long military alert peaked on its northern borders with Syria and Lebanon. Meanwhile, Lebanon's first election in 9 years came to a close. Military and political strategists believe that now that the election is over, Iran can focus its efforts on taking revenge on Israel for the 3 attacks on Revolutionary Guards targets in Syria on February 10th, April 9th, and April 29th. The Palestinian Nakba Day on May 15th is a day of terror, and the Israeli intelligence warned that Iranian and Hezbollah units are preparing for a missile attack. Officials believe that Iran will strike military targets in northern Israel. The Air Force and air defense weapons are on the highest alert. Debka military sources state that the missile attack could be stopped only by destroying the launchers inside Syria and Lebanon. On Sunday, the Israeli Security Cabinet met to discuss their strategy, and Netanyahu had this to say.
אנחנו נחושים לבלום את התוקפנות האיראנית נגדנו באיבה, גם אם הדבר יהיה כרוך במאבק. עדיף עכשיו מאשר אחר כך. אומות שלא היו מוכנות לפעול בזמן נגד תוקפנות רצחנית נגדן, שילמו אחר כך מחירים כבדים בהרבה. איננו רוצים בהסלמה, אבל אנחנו ערוכים לכל תרחיש.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech last Monday, which showed that Iran lied about having developed nuclear weapons for 12 years, could impact U.S. domestic and foreign policy. His presentation was given after a collaboration between U.S. President Trump, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Netanyahu. He showed that since Iran lied once, they can most certainly do it again. Meanwhile, Trump discussed the potential renegotiations of the Iran nuclear deal.
$1.8 billion in cash and $150 billion. You know what we got? We got nothing. We got nothing. So that doesn't mean I wouldn't negotiate a new agreement. We'll see what happens. But I think, if anything, what's happening today and what's happened over the last little while and what we've learned has really shown that I've been 100% right.
Trump now has a tool for exposing President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry as misleading the American people and trusting Iran's false claims that the Islamic Republic had never sought a nuclear weapon because it is contrary to religious beliefs. Trump can accuse Obama of knowingly signing a deal built on Iranian lies, which could aid Republican candidates in the upcoming U.S. midterm elections. Trump also feels he now has more leverage at his meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to lead to denuclearization. Trump recently stated that, quote, killing the Iran nuclear deal will send the right message to North Korea. Former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson discussed Trump's upcoming meeting with the North Korean leader.
I don't think that denuclearization can be accomplished in the first meeting, but I think important steps leading to serious denuclearization might happen. I think if we get, one, a ban on nuclear and missile exports, no chemical weapons to Syria, and freezes and limitations on North Korea's nuclear and missile activity, will be a positive step. In addition, ways that the 25 million people in South Korea are not exposed to a conventional or a conventional attack from North Korea.
This is what Netanyahu had to say in his widely publicized speech about the Iran nuclear deal.
A few weeks ago, in a great intelligence achievement, Israel obtained half a ton of the material inside these vaults. And here's what we got. 55,000 pages. Another 55,000 files on 183 CDs. Everything you're about to see is an exact copy of the original Iranian material. First, Iran lied about never having a nuclear weapons program. 100,000 secret files prove that they lied. Second, even after the deal, Iran continued to preserve and expand its nuclear weapons know-how for future use. Why would a terrorist regime hide and meticulously catalog its secret nuclear files if not to use them at a later date? Third, Iran lied again in 2015 when it didn't come clean to the IAEA as required by the nuclear deal. And finally, the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, is based on lies. It's based on Iranian lies and Iranian deception. 100,000 files right here prove that they lied.
Debka sources reveal that Netanyahu's decision to go public on the archive occurred after intense discussions with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo when they met in Tel Aviv on April 29th. Pompeo discovered that Trump preferred that Israel disclose everything to the public. The following day, Netanyahu called the Security Cabinet into an urgent session to inform them about the news he would reveal in a televised press conference. Only a portion of the archive was revealed by the time he gave his speech. The remaining documents were still being translated from Farsi with the help of nuclear experts for technical terminology. Before deciding whether the U.S. will stay in the deal, Trump wants to see what the rest of the files contain, If further evidence of Iran's developing nuclear weapons is revealed, it will influence his decision on May 12th. If Trump puts sanctions on Iran, he will not attend the embassy inauguration on May 14th. If he holds off on sanctions to a later date, he will attend. Debka sources report that this joint project between the U.S. and Israel began when Pompeo informed Trump of the arrival of Mossad director Yossi Cohen with a proposal from Netanyahu. Israeli intelligence had received a tip from the Iranian exiled opposition that Iran's secret atomic archive had been traced to a hiding place in Tehran. A group of watchmen who belonged to an elite unit of the Revolutionary Guards were willing to make it available in return for bribes and a safe escape route from the country. This elite unit of guards was established to protect the archive and other secret sites under a high-profile officer of the IRGC. The archive covered the secrets of the Iran nuclear deal program until 2015, when the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was concluded between Iran and 6 world powers. The Mossad chief was convinced that Iran continued secretly developing a nuclear weapon in violation of the deal at secret sites unknown to inspectors of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Pompeo was in favor of seizing the chance to get access to the atomic archive, and Trump agreed to sign a presidential directive for the operation to move forward. Debka intelligence sources reveal that the CIA, the Mossad, and the Iranian opposition group engaged its undercover agents in Iran by bribing the guards to retrieve the archive, either as photocopies, downloads, or originals. Their task was to smuggle the 100,000 documents, tapes, and files out of Iran to Iraq. From there, they were sent to Jordan, where Israeli and U.S. agents passed the materials by hand to the Israeli border. The secret files offered evidence that Iran cheated in negotiating the nuclear deal with 6 world powers. This could help President Trump remove the pressure to stay with the 2015 nuclear accord when it's due for renewal on May 12th. He can show that Iran negotiated in bad faith, denying the existence of a nuclear weapons program while keeping it intact and ready for reactivation. The head of the Iranian parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Committee has stated Iran's plans for the nuclear deal.
ما این محدودیت‌ها رو پذیرفتیم با این هدف که تحریم‌ها به طور کامل مرتفع بشود. در شرایطی که تحریم بخواهد یک بار دیگر برقرار شود، طبیعی است که هیچ توجیهی برای افکار عمومی ملت ما و برای دولت ما و مجلس شورای اسلامی در ادامه این راه وجود نخواهد داشت. به میزانی که نیاز داریم غنیسازی اورانیوم رو بالا ببریم.
With us to discuss this is Dr. Martin Sherman, director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
Do you believe that Netanyahu's speech served its purpose and was a good strategy to convince Trump to back out of the deal?
Well, I certainly endorse the speech. I certainly think it can give Trump a lot of ammunition for making an informed decision to either nix the nuclear agreement or to radically fix it, which is more or less the same as nixing it. I think it served other purposes as well. I think it exposed the porous nature of the Iranian security establishment and showed Israel's enhanced ability to infiltrate it, which I think makes Israel a desired ally and a reliable ally who you should keep on your side. I think it is also going to undermine confidence and trust within the Iranian establishment. And so I think all in all, it was a very important event which should be utilized by Trump. And it showed that, as you mentioned yourself before, that the Iranians went into this deal in bad faith. They lied about it. And there's no reason to think that they will not continue to lie. And the agreement itself is very difficult to verify because the Iranians will not allow access to sites where you precisely would suspect that they are violating the agreements, i.e. the military sites.
How do you think Trump will respond when he must decide on the future of the Iran nuclear deal May 12th?
Well, given his past record, he's been very resolute and been true to his campaign promises and campaign declarations. He's always declared that this was a bad deal. He, as we saw just a few minutes ago, He pointed out many of its defects. So unless he can radically and reliably fix it, which means bring in the ballistic missile program, bring in more intrusive inspections, which include military installations, get rid of the sunset clause, and other such things like, for instance, the Iranians fomenting and financing terror. Unless he can do that, I think the only real option he can to maintain his credibility is to nix it. Because we all heard Zarif's speech saying that there was no chance that Iran was going to renegotiate these terms, and certainly not radical changes in them. So I think the only real option on the table is to repudiate the agreement, given Iranian bad faith.
What do you think former President Obama and former Secretary of State John Kerry had to gain from pushing this nuclear deal in 2015?
Well, you know, the really creepy thing about Obama's foreign policy is that when you look at it and you see the catastrophic results that it resulted in, you never really know whether this was an appalling failure or a stunning success. You never really know whether this was the result of unintended blunders or a calculated process with purposeful intent. You know, Obama was perhaps the most Islamophilic president ever in the United States, totally unmoored and openly unmoored from its Judeo-Christian foundations of America. And so he had a different take on US interests, completely different from his predecessors. And so I don't think Obama really saw an empowered Iran or an ascendant Muslim Brotherhood as something inimical to US interests, which of course sets him aside from every previous president and hopefully all the presidents that come after him.
Do you think that the Israeli-Iranian hostilities in Syria will affect the nuclear issue?
I don't think that there's a simple deterministic connection between the two, because you can raise conflicting and plausible assumptions. You know, you might say that heavy Iranian losses will induce Iran to withdraw and focus on domestic issues. On the other hand, you might say that this will sting them into accelerating their efforts. I don't think alone that will determine the Iranian attitude. But I think the opposite dynamic is the dominant one, because certainly the nuclear issue has facilitated the Iranian action in Syria. It would be impossible to imagine the Iranian presence in Syria today if it hadn't been for the nuclear deal in 2015, because that empowered them, enriched them, and entrenched them politically. So I think the opposite dynamic is the more evident one.
How do you think Trump's summit with the North Korean leader will affect Iran's nuclear posture? Well,
certainly if there's a successful outcome, I think it will enhance his stature and allow him to push forward any policy that he may choose. But again, perhaps the opposite might be more interesting here, that his resolve on the Iranian issue could impact the North Korean issue. You know, if Trump shows on the Iranian issue that he is prepared to sacrifice contractual formalities for substantial compliance, or the opposite, actually emphasize substantial compliance over contractual formality, I think that will send a clear message to the North Koreans.
What do you believe will be the outcome of Putin's meeting with Netanyahu in Moscow on Wednesday?
Well, that's anyone's guess, but I tell you what I would hope. I certainly, you know, given the fact that everyone knows that Russian interests and Israeli interests are not identical, I think what we should hope for is that Netanyahu can convince Putin that Israel is not against Russian interests, but it has a very vital interest in preventing the Iranians turning Syria into a forward base on the border of Israel, and that Putin should continue to allow the freedom of the Israeli Air Force to enforce Israeli interests without undermining the Russian interests.
That's Dr. Martin Sherman. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And now for a roundup of this week's regional stories, the news in brief. Students in Libya participated in a national robotics competition which strived to encourage studies in artificial intelligence. The event was sponsored by Hexa Connection, a Libyan organization that supports innovation. 50 teams and 120 participants competed in the event, which aims to provide a platform to educate robot developers. Teams were judged on robotic design and efficiency in carrying out tasks, and the winner received a trophy and financial reward.
هدف المنظمين من هذه البطولة اللي هي منظمة هيكس كونكشن أحد المنظمين في هذه البطولة هو تكوين مجتمع الروبوتات في ليبيا. في كل عام ينظم سنويا في كل عام بطولة عربية للروبوتات لهم 11 سنة تقام. ما فيش مشاركين من ليبيا نتيجة ما فيش خبرات يعني في المجال في قوانين البطولة العربية يعني. فرأينا في هيكس كونكشن إن أفضل شيء إن احنا نديروا بطولة محلية. من البطولة المحلية هذه يكونوا مجموعة من الخبرات، يكون عندنا مدربين، يكون عندنا مشاركين قد يستطيع في السنوات القادمة الترشح للبطولة العربية والمشاركة فيها.
Sri Lankan artist Mark Rana Singh is bringing his creative ice sculptures to the Gulf region. The founder of Impulse Creations, a company that provides customized ice sculptures for events throughout the Gulf, he started his career by making sculptures for hotels in the Middle East. Some of his creations include ice horses, camels, cars, and towers. The artist also carves food and received 4 gold medals during the Culinary Olympics in Germany in 2016. Another type of sculptures, this time with paper goods. High school student Ahmed Al-Ma'amari creates machinery and appliances out of cardboard. He has made refrigerators, ATM machines, vacuums, and fans out of the lightweight material and uses air power to run the devices. His technique has been successful as all the appliances are still working. He says his goal is to support his family and pay for his school tuition. That's it for this week's edition of the Debka File. We'll be back with you next week with all the exclusive news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East. Thanks for watching.